Hello everybody, and thanks for coming along to our forum. It's the last one of this series. We're thinking about another series starting in the autumn, but we've got that to think about. We never have time to get it right. Well, this was a key finding from the GIRI research. And modern construction industry is characterised by constant time pressure. This forum is going to unpackage that issue and expose the links between time and error. Nick is here, Nick Francis. He's from our training and consultancy, GTC, and he's going to run the workshop. And he's going to guide you about the constant time pressures we've got and how we actually spend our time and how we should spend our time and what we need to do to use our time better to avoid error. So I'm just going to give a short introduction about GIRI for those of you who are not familiar with us, and then I'll hand over to Nick. On the housekeeping front, please could you mute your microphones if you haven't already, if you're not speaking, and remember when you go into one of the breakout rooms, please turn them back on, otherwise your colleagues won't be able to hear you. Any questions you have as we go through, if you could put those in the chat box, then we'll get those picked up and we'll either answer them at the end if we have time, or if not, we'll get back to you by other means. If you have any technical problems, then the best thing to do is turn off and turn on again. I know that's the usual tech response, but it seems to work, and you'll come back in on the same link. And we also know that not all participants are able to spend the full hour and a half with us, and if you're not, then you can catch up with us because we're recording the session and it's available on YouTube with a link to our website. So it's been a bit of a tough time for everyone over the last year or so. Firms have had to reassess their overheads and budgets and things like that. And as a result, investment in longer term industry improvement has come under the microscope, particularly training. Many of you may be familiar with GIRI, but I'd just like to reflect on some of the key points. Our original strategy for change, we came about with as a result of some research, which was carried out in 2016. And this image here is showing the results of that research in terms of the cost of error. You've got 5% of direct cost, which I think we all understand is what you need to do to put an error right. Then you've got the indirect cost, 7%, which is the impact of the direct error on people and their methods and processes that are going on around it. Then you've got this unrecorded process waste, which is mistakes and errors that occur, but they're not recorded and people just kind of get over them and fudge things and move on, but it still has a time and cost impact. And of course, latent defects where things have come to light sometime after the piece of infrastructure or the building has been handed over. Now, so that's 21%. Now, the accuracy of any survey or research report can be questioned, but the methods we used were considered to be 80% accurate. But even if it is a bit higher or lower, it's still an order of magnitude different from what an average construction company makes, which is about 2%. So a total GDP of the construction industry is in the region of 100 billion. So 21 billion pounds of waste each year. It ought to be a no-brainer. We've got to do something about this. Our research showed there are these top 10 root causes of error. And the activities that we've been carrying out as GIRI have been focused on this research, and Nick's going to talk about that some more later. So let's take a quick look at how GIRI is going about seeking to achieve its objective of error reduction. We're doing this through two means, one through thought leadership, which we have in the form of training. We've got 3 accredited CITB accredited training courses, and we're now launching the Train the Trainer course as well, which brings that up to 4. We've got numerous campaigns going on. with webinars in UK and Ireland and audiences all over the world. We're members of the ICE Learning Hub, and we've produced an e-learning module with the Supply Chain School. And of course, we've got these forums as we have had today, and we've been doing these for some time, and we will be continuing them on into towards the winter. The other side of GIRI is the knowledge sharing. We've done quite a lot of research, and those research reports, particularly into technology and things of that ilk, are on our website, along with our GIRI design guide, which we feature because design was such an important point when we looked at the top 10 root causes. We are continually increasing our activity on our social media, on LinkedIn and Twitter, and hopefully you're joining in with that when you can. And finally, networking. The networking has been a bit more of a challenge, obviously, because we're not seeing ourselves IRL in real life. I've learned that yesterday. So yeah, but hopefully we'll be able to, once we get out of this tunnel, we'll all be able to go down the pub and talk to each other again. So so these all lead to error reduction. And so what are the benefits? There's the productivity benefit that I think is well understood. But there are other benefits. Let's take safety, for instance. There's been a study in Australia that 37% of accidents occur during rework. Now, that's in Australia. I don't think there's any reason to believe it's much different over here. And there are studies going on at the moment. On the sustainability question, clearly, if you're not wasting resources and materials, then you're going to have less of a carbon footprint. And there are other sustainabilities alongside that. Then you've got quality. Well, I think that speaks for itself. If you're avoiding error, you're going to get better quality. Predictability, well, that's interesting, because if you think about it and you're not wasting time and money in the process of delivering your project, then the outcomes are more predictable. So your likelihood of achieving completion on time and within budget is increased. And of course, all those things together will lead to a better reputation, both for individual companies who adopt these error reduction principles, but also for the industry as a whole. So simply put, this is our strategic aim: to improve construction productivity and quality and reduce costs and waste by eliminating error. But we need to have the right culture for this throughout the industry, and a lot of our training and these forums is about this culture change. We need to change the way we work and behave now to achieve this and get this better reputation I talked about. So that's enough from me. I'd like now to hand over to Nick.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Cliff. Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. If you possibly can I ask you please to turn your cameras on, because it's really nice to see other human beings. I've been in my attic here for about a year and a half, so any opportunity to see human faces is probably good for my mental health. So hello, good to see you all. We've got an interesting session this afternoon, and we've got quite a lot to get through. So I will explain what we're going to do for the rest of our time. So this is the big whiteboard that we're all going to be sharing and working on. And we're going to start off at the middle of this big spiral. And we're going to ask a question: how do we spend our time? And I'm going to ask each of you to suggest things we should do and things we do that we probably shouldn't be spending our time doing. So that'll be our first thing, to get a feel for what should we be doing and what are we doing, to see if there's a difference. We'll then introduce the thing called the Eisenhower Matrix that some of you might recognise, but this is a way of looking at tasks or activities and comparing them in two ways, like how important are they and how urgent are they? And that will allow us to sort of frame this problem of how we decide how we spend our time. We'll then move on and have a look at the root causes of error, as Cliff just touched on, but we're going to relate that to our important and urgent matrix and say, well, actually, where are the activities that are important to preventing error, and are they always the urgent things? Next, we're going to take that and say, well, how can we improve the way we use our time? Is there anything we can do to make sure that we're doing important stuff and we're not being continually distracted by urgent things? Is there anything we can do? So that'll be the first part of the session, to try and give ourselves some top tips, essentially, from our experience. But after that, we're going to cast our net a bit wider, and we're going to say, well, okay, let's have a think about time. What is it, and how do we relate to it? So this is where it starts to get a bit fun. We're going to start off with a bit of a dive into some surrealist art and see what Salvador Dali thought about time, and is there anything that tells us? We'll then dive into a bit of neuroscience and see what neuroscience tells us about how we relate to time, and is there anything in our brains that makes this a particularly tricky challenge for us to not allow time to get away from us? Dive then into a bit of Greek mythology, find out how the Greeks talked about managing time. Are there any lessons there for us? And then we'll have a look at culture, and in particular look at the difference between Western cultures and Eastern cultures, and how the concept and the awareness of time might influence the way people behave. And then we'll put that into context by looking at some statistics of economics in China and the US, so we can see the tangible consequences of an attitude towards time in a sort of very measurable metric. And after looking at that, we're going to come back to our matrix and we'll say, okay, well, now we've looked at all those other sources, is there anything we can do now to improve how we use our time in the future? So not just what can we do better on a daily basis, but actually, is there any overarching approach towards the way we interact with time that might be useful? And we'll go back into some breakout groups and look at two things. So we'll have a look at one set of groups looking at commitment devices, so sort of control measures, and another group looking at culture. Are there cultural things? And then at the end of all of that, we'll ask the big so what question, which is, what are you going to do? What can you and your organization do to ensure that time pressures don't lead to error? So that's where we're going to race through in the next hour. But to start us off, I'm going to invite you all into this big whiteboard. So you've seen me flying around on this, and I'm going to share a link with you all in the chat box. Now, this thing is called Mural. If you've got a scrolly mouse, if you move it up and down, it zooms in and out. And down at the bottom of the screen, there's a little icon. It looks a bit like you get on any CAD package, and it shows you where you're looking on the screen. You can also grab the slidey bar and zoom in and out like that. You can also just grab hold of the screen and move it around. And what I would like you to do, please, is when I share the link, click on the link. You'll come in, this will pop up as a window, and come to this bit in the middle. And then in the green square, please put down on a post-it note how we should spend our time to deliver high quality projects and prevent error. Now, the way to do this is you look for this icon. So over on top left of the screen, there's a thing that looks like a post-it note. Click on that, grab yourself a post-it note and drag it onto the screen where you want it to go. And I'm going to put an example, so you just type in. So I'm going to say my example of a person and a task that they should be doing might be a bricklayer, and they should be checking drawings. Okay, so that's my first post-it note. Then I'm going to go down to the bottom square, the red square, and give an example of a person and what they shouldn't be doing or a waste of their time. And I'll say, well, let's take that same bricklayer, say hunting for drawings. So there you go. I've given an example of a person and something that is good that they should be doing, and a person and something that is bad, is a waste of their time. So I will now share this link. So what I'll do is I'll go to share, visit a link, copy that link, and I will now put that into the chat box. So I'll stop sharing just so that your screens all pop up. And here in the chat box, there's a link. So there's a blue link that should have appeared in your chat box. So if you click on that link now, you should start to appear in the mural. When you click it, it will open a new window. If you're having any problems, you can cut and paste that into a web browser. If anyone's got any problems, if it's not working, give me a shout and I'll try and help. There we go. I think we've got 15 people in, so I think most of you are in. If anyone's having any problems, give me a shout and I will see if I can help. What I will do is...
Nick,
yeah, hello.
is that going to work in an iPad?
It will work if you open a web browser and copy it into the web browser window. I think that should work.
Okay.
So give that a go. The iPad might ask you to download an app though, which try copying it into the web browser first. If it doesn't work after a minute, don't worry, you won't miss out on too much. Oops, someone's dragging around the other squares. Yeah, I'll just lock those temporarily. Okay, I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes and just allow everyone to put their post-it notes on.
Sorry, Nick, I can't see where I get the post-it from.
So if you go up to the very top left of your screen, there's an icon that looks like a post-it note. If you
it says text. Yeah, you can put it. Yeah,
got it.
Sorry.
Brilliant. Yeah. You can also just double click on the screen and a post-it note will appear. But I didn't want to offer you too many options because if your brain's like mine, I can only cope with one bit of information at a time. So. Great. Well, that little ping pong tells us that time is up. Now, what I'll do is I will share my screen. So if you just want to minimize Mural, so the box you're using, and then I'm sharing screen now. So that just means that we'll all be looking at the same stuff. So let's have a look at how we should be spending our time. We've got this big one, engineer giving instructions to site staff. Okay, that sounds pretty worthwhile. Leaders, digitizing forms and process. Interesting. Okay, so putting in the effort to digitize things. We've got management accountant, preparing a budget and cash flow. Yeah. Engineering project manager, reviewing drawings to plan best sequence of works. Site supervisor, establishing a test and inspection plan. Reducing admin, really interesting. Designer, convincing client of construction time needed. Okay. Early placing of orders, preparing a marketing plan for my business, dedicate time to build quality design plans, teaching colleagues. That's an interesting one as well. And I'll just come to this one, drinking tea and coffee and having healthy breaks. So I laughed when I first read that one, but then it occurred to me that, when I get busy, I'll often not take breaks and consequently my work might suffer. So let's have a look at some of these ones in the red area, what we shouldn't be spending our time doing. designer, running after site supervisor to obtain feedback. Okay, so chasing after other people. Too much chit chat in office, long breaks. Yeah. Operatives filling in paper forms, being unsure if they follow the right process. Okay. Not having information in easily accessible format. Unnecessary network, which adds no value. Networking. Project manager, reading all incoming emails. Okay, yeah, being consumed by emails. Management accountant, checking others' work far too long. Project manager, chasing down ITPs. So there's a theme here, isn't there? That this is a lot of running around trying to do stuff that should have been done already by the sounds of it. Planner, struggling with the technology. Engineer, finding drawings for trades who should have their own drawings. Okay, really interesting. So what I want to do now is just introduce that next bit, which is this thing we call the Eisenhower Matrix. Now, it's called the Eisenhower Matrix because it's credited to Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, who commanded all the D-Day invasions and then later went on to become US president. So clearly quite a busy person who, it's reasonable to think, had a steady flow of urgent tasks coming his way all the time. But what he identified was that he was only going to be effective if he could focus on important things and could escape from the constant barrage of urgent tasks. Now, I think this is particularly interesting for us because I know in the construction industry, we always feel like we're deluged by urgent tasks and we never have time to do the other things on our to-do list. So this gives us 4 quadrants. We've got, and I'll just try and drag these post-it notes up here and let me lock these, unlock and drag them up. Yeah, you're probably all feeling a bit seasick from me whizzing around this screen. So it gives us 4 quadrants. So we've got high importance and high urgency tasks. I'll let you just shout out. Anyone want to sort of suggest how should we respond to things that are important and urgent? Probably quite an easy question, to be honest. But what do you think about those tasks? I think I'll put you out of misery, but basically, if it's important and urgent, we probably need to just get on with it. But then what about these tasks? Less important tasks that are still very urgent. Can anyone suggest? Yeah, Catherine,
Yeah.
What do you?
Well, I would prioritize them and put them in order, and then start doing them before just jumping randomly into.
Okay, so you're thinking just make it as efficient as possible. So you're not wasting time on them. You just get them ticked off in a logical way.
Well, obviously I need to spend some time to prioritize, but that time will save me time for the future.
Great. Okay. Lovely. What? Anyone else? Any thoughts about these less important but highly urgent tasks? Anyone suggest how they would like to deal with these low important, high urgency tasks?
Try and get someone else to do them.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Delegation. What about low importance, low urgency tasks? So, you know, these are your probably niff-naff admin that you sort of have to do. Oh, well, I don't know. Do you have to do it? That's the question. Anyone, any suggestions about those tasks?
Delete the ones you don't need to do.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah. If we can delete some of these, it gives us more capacity, doesn't it? So it might be that you can delete them, get rid of them. You know, if one of these is surfing the internet in your coffee break, well, you know, maybe, or surfing the internet when you're not in your coffee break. So we can get rid of them. We can also try and automate them. And then we've got these high importance, low urgency tasks. What's anyone's thoughts on those? Or maybe can I ask anyone, can anyone give me an example of a high importance but low urgency task? Maybe from your own experience, your own work now.
Training.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it
Good
never
spot.
feels urgent, but we know it's important. Great, thank you. So let's look at this and compare it to the root causes of error. Here we go. So this is the graphic that comes straight out of the GIRI research report. and it ranks all of these factors from 0 through to 9, where 9 is relatively the most important, the most significant. So you can see that these top 10-ish tasks are all very similar in terms of their weighting, but the very top one is inadequate planning. So what are your reflections in terms of planning? So not for tomorrow, but planning for the future. What category of importance and urgence do you think that would typically fall into?
High
Well, it's very-
importance. Oh,
Carry on.
high importance but low urgency.
Okay, yeah, because it's distant, isn't it? But we know it's important. And interestingly, the GIRI research slaps it right there at the top of the list, going, this is the main reason we get things wrong. Let's have a look at another one. So we've got poorly communicated design information. So that is, you know, it's not necessarily saying the design is wrong, but people don't understand it for whatever reason. So that might be, you know, formatting of drawings, how clear are drawing notes, can you reduce the length of documents? So thinking of a task like proofreading drawings for clarity, or editing down drawing notes and specifications to make them more succinct, what sort of category in terms of urgency and importance do you think that would come into, the editing down of the report to make it more palatable? I'm going to pounce on someone.
I think that's low importance, although I feel it should be further up the scale. But I think generally in the industry, it's not. You know, we don't go through reviewers regularly as we should do. I don't think. But I think it's regarded as low urgency, definitely. In terms of importance, I think it is important because you need things to be concise and understandable by people, don't you? But yeah, I think perhaps the perception is not quite right in the industry.
Interesting. Okay. And then we've got, I've just stopped sharing my screen so we can see each other. And then we've got another one that cropped up here is the culture, poor culture in relation to quality. So if we look at something like a culture change program, changing people's attitude towards error, I'd suggest that that is probably important, but again, it's never actually going to be urgent, is it? It's never going to be as urgent as the thing that's happening this afternoon or tomorrow. So what this is doing is it's painting a bit of a picture for us that we can see that, here we go, I'll share my screen again, that many of these things that our research tells us prevent error and tells us are the root causes of error, like poor planning, like a poor culture, like not doing enough training, like not setting the right relationships between teams, they tend to sit here in this high importance but low urgency category. And what we all recognise from the industry is that we spend an awful lot of our time feeling like we're fighting fires, we're doing the urgent stuff. So the first question I'd like you to ask or chat about when you go into your breakout rooms, please, is, are there any ways we can improve the use of our time? So identify any methods or techniques that you know that can help project teams spend more time on high importance but low urgency tasks. So it might be that you think of an example of a team where you go, actually, I saw a really good example where people were able to concentrate on this thing. Or you could think the other way and think, actually, here's an example of when we absolutely couldn't focus on the important stuff because there was urgent stuff getting in the way. So what I'll do is ask Helena to put you into breakout rooms now. Let's just have a quick timings check. So we'll go for, could we just have 5 minutes, please, Helena, for breakout rooms? So in the breakout rooms, please just discuss that issue. Try and come up with any ways you think, any methods or techniques that could help a project team spend more time on their important but not urgent tasks. And if you can pick one person in the team who can just explain at the end, give a quick 30-second summary of what you discussed in your groups. Okay, so you were in 4 breakout groups. Could I please ask group one, if you happen to pay attention to which room you're in, could group one, someone from group one, just please sum up, what did you discuss, and did you identify any techniques or methods that can help people or project teams to focus on high importance, low urgency tasks? Who have we got from group one?
He was in group one.
Good question. Does anyone know? I'll tell you what, let's make it.
Catherine, Peter, Ben, Claire, and Jan.
Oh, okay, that's me. Ironically. Okay, I'll go, guys, and just summarise for the group. So we came up with a couple of examples from a couple of the organisations we work for amongst us, and yeah, it does happen. You know, I think it's generally where processes are being bypassed, meetings aren't happening when they should, and they're quite. The reason the meetings are there in existence is because they are important. It's about lessons learned, a lot of them. So some of the methods that are used in our organisations collectively was review meetings fortnightly. So we were talking about how sort of a team gathering and you're reviewing information, reviewing processes was quite important and really useful. They found they could pull people up about where they've missed things in a process, etc. So that's been quite useful. We spoke about communication planning because I think it's Ben and myself, we've seen firsthand where on a project by project basis, information isn't really shared very well at all. It definitely happens in the organisation we're in. There's no platform for project managers to discuss information. So I'm probably going off piece a bit, I realise, but anyway, it's about communication planning, making sure that the platforms are in existence for those people to discuss these matters and to have those meetings. And then the last one-ish, diary entries, actually getting it in the diary, because I find that if a meeting's in the diary, generally it will happen. If you don't put it in the diary, you will forget about these issues that you're trying to iron out. So if the urgent thing can be solved by a meeting, then get it in the diary really, and then you can extend the time on it or whatever, but it's in there. Yeah, and there are a couple of other things, but I've spoken a lot now, so Michelle.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Claire. That's really interesting. So using diaries, getting things fixed in the diary, having review meetings fortnightly and constant review of process, and planning how you communicate and having those appropriate platforms in place to help that communication. So you're building the framework for that communication to work within. Excellent. Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. Can we go to group two now, please?
Can I just say, I think we've got a couple of people who can't hear anything. Oh, I'll send them a message. Sorry.
Okay. Have we got, so anyone in group two?
That is Martin, Natalie, David Singleton, David Pickering.
So David Pickering here. I volunteered to feedback for the group. So the thoughts that we had a good discussion and ideas from all members of the breakout. One of the key ones was defining roles and responsibilities. So the tool that was mentioned was a Iraqi chart. This would add a focus on tasks. We also talked about risk management.
Okay, yeah, you're a bit breaky up, but I think we can hear you. Yeah, that's great, please. Yeah.
Monitoring and compliance checking was another area.
Can you expand on that? So in what way in terms of monitoring and
so checking that things are happening as you expect them to in theory.
Okay, so that constant monitoring and checking.
So I mean the question, so that's looking at sort of how everyone across the team can use their time better. If there's blockages or parts of the team that are overloaded.
Okay.
And
So
then
watch
another
out.
point was sharing knowledge across the team. So you didn't end up with it all in one place if that element then isn't there.
Ah, okay. So it's building in a bit of redundancy in your teams.
Yeah, and tied with that is obviously communication, which is obviously the thing that we come back to time and time again.
Okay.
And maybe it should have been at the beginning, but saved it to last. Was the leadership aspect. An individual's ability to manage their time is very strongly driven by their line manager or the senior people in the company.
Okay. Can you expand on that? In what way?
Well, if, for example, I happen to have a line manager who liked to call meetings at short notice when I plan my week ahead, that would can't imagine where I got that idea from.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay,
great.
Their
inability to plan is then having a knock-on effect to my ability to plan.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else from group 2 want to add to that or expand on any of the points there?
I think collaboration is an absolute key fundamental to making sure jobs run right. We talked a lot about systems approach, or I did, because I'm a quality manager and I'm biased, but we talk a lot about setting a game plan, keeping to the game plan, monitoring you on the game plan, and being led on the game plan. And I think that collaboration as a game plan is fundamentally important to make sure you don't go off piste and therefore move yourself away from meeting aims and objectives of the project.
Okay. Yeah. So keeping you right. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
I think I'd add one more bit to the leadership is just ensuring that you've got a team that's got the capability and you're not delegating work to somebody who can't do it.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. And I suppose that ties to your RACI matrix in a way, but it's at making sure you're not just arbitrarily putting someone's name there, they actually can do it. Brilliant. Thank you, group 2. Lots and lots of stuff there. And what about group 3? Guessing if you haven't been already, it might be you. Do we know who group 3 is, Helena?
Sorry, they've all been rearranged because people had to leave the session and so on. So I'm afraid not.
Anyone who hasn't been, if you
jump in. That was me, myself, and Lisa, and Stephen, and Ian there. And to prove my time management, I missed half of it because I was on the phone. But we did come in on one bit about communication of decisions made, and decisions made perhaps not transparently, and then expanded that into the transparency of how the decision was made, so that it kind of stayed made, and you didn't have people questioning or reopening something that was already done. That was towards the end of the group. I'll have to bow to the others now who were there the whole time. Stephen, Lisa.
Anyone else want to add to what Rupert just said?
I can't really add because I got kicked out and we were talking and we were just in the process of making notes. So we never got to the end and it took me about 5 minutes to get back in.
Okay, well, I just want to jump on something that Rupert mentioned there that I thought was really interesting. So in the military, so you mentioned about communication of decisions made. And something that the military really hammer home is an idea of what they call a warning order, which is not waiting until something is complete and then springing it on your subordinates. But you would say, we think this is going to happen soon, so start preparing in this way. And that sounds like it's tied into what you were saying, Rupert, in terms of communication of decisions made. So, for example, a decision might be made in a meeting. There might then be consequent work to work out the detail, but can you give that information of this decision earlier so that other people have more time to prepare? And the other thing that was interesting is you talked about transparency of decisions made. And again, in the military, they do a thing called in order to. So whenever you tell someone to do something, you would never say, go to the top of that hill. You would always say, go to the top of that hill in order to look in that direction and tell me when you see some tanks. You know, and that's a very trite example, but the in order to is a really important bit, because it means that people understand why they're being told something. They can understand how important it is, how urgent it is, and they have trust then in the information they've been given, because they can see the context it's in. So really interesting that you came up with those, Rupert. And then I think we've got group 4 as well. So anyone, if you haven't been, it's your turn. So who's going to be the final group?
I think we nominated latterly that Kane was going to speak for our group.
Kane, it sounds like you've been volunteered. Oh, and you're on mute. There we go.
On mute. Always the classic I'm on mute. Apologies. Yeah. So we talked initially about making sure to take things from into that those high importance tasks to make sure they are done, is actually planning in time for those tasks to be done. So saying, okay, this is a period of time, we've got to do that. And then I think Joe in our group also mentioned that it's really important then that the team are the early involvement in the team, so that effectively, and Jao chipped in saying we're making sure that the people that are doing the tasks are able then to say, well, actually this task will take this long, because what you'll get is senior managers or managers saying, well, you've got a week to do that, mate, and the chaps on the ground saying, well, it's completely impossible to do it within a week. So trying to listen to those kind of that kind of feedback, and as Zhao said, you know, that's really important from a project sponsor's perspective, because I work for a main contractor, and we will do whatever we're told. If the sponsor says they want it done in 3 weeks, to get the job, we'll say we can get it done in 3 weeks. That's a pressure point there being applied. So some contractors, not us, will tell people whatever they want to hear in those senses. So you know, and that's when things will go wrong, particularly this time of the year for us, where we're working lots of schools and things like that. Everyone wants it done in the 6 week summer holidays.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's what we talked about.
Yeah. Sorry. Does that sound strange? Or it just sounds strange to me.
You've got quite a lot of feedback there.
Okay, well, I'll keep going and hope it gets better. So, Dr. Martin Holmberg, you've talked about keeping sight of the bigger picture and aligning mindset tools. Yeah, okay, so that's great. Thank you. It's a slightly less military example of why you need to tell people why a decision has been made. Okay, so it sounds like you came up with a lot of really interesting ideas there. And that's on the mural board now, so you can all flick and have a look at that if you want. I'll just lock that down so it doesn't all get moved around. So we've had a deep dive into what we do now, how that relates in terms of importance and urgency, and any techniques that you're aware of that work well for getting people or giving teams the freedom to focus on important things that aren't quite urgent. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at other factors about time. And we're going to start off over here. Let's zoom in and think about some surrealist art. Why not? It's a construction industry seminar on avoiding error. So let's start off with some surrealist art. Well, Salvador Dali was probably the most famous surrealist artist. And this is a picture of his clocks. You probably recognize them, his melting clocks. But what he was playing with here is this idea that time isn't something that we really understand. And he's got 3 clocks, and some people suggest, well, that represents time that's in the past, time that's in the present, and time that's in the future, and they might be separate things. And this picture, the disintegration of the present persistence of memory, is supposed to represent the marching industrialization, things being built, and how time is a strange sort of medium through which to view that. Okay, that's a bit abstract and bizarre. So let's go to some science now. And let's have a look at neuroscience instead. Well, actually, in neuroscience, there have been some really interesting discoveries recently. And what they find is that when we think about the past, we use certain bits of our brain. But when we think about the present, what we're doing right now, we use different parts of our brain. But then when we think about the future in terms of planning, that is also different parts of our brain. So we don't use the same bits of our brain for thinking about what am I doing now and immediately in the future that we use when we think about actually what are we going to do further into the future. So this idea of planning. So we're saying, well, the root cause, the number one root cause of error identified by GIRI is inadequate planning. And we know that we use a different part of our brain for that. So that's quite interesting, I think, from a not making error perspective. And interestingly, any of you are familiar with our leadership training will recognize that this is something we address. And we have we call it the get it wrong exercise. It's based on the idea of a pre-mortem, where we change our mindsets and we jump into the future and we try and take a look at the future, but using those bits of our brain that we normally use in the present. You don't have to know you're doing this, it's just the technique that underpins the work that we do. But what this does is it allows us to think in an emotional way and a visceral way about problems in the future and feel them as if they're happening now. So that underpins a lot of what we do in the leadership courses. But let's now go on from neuroscience, and why not dive into a bit of Greek mythology. So I am no expert in Greek mythology, but in researching for this forum, I found out about Odysseus. Now, he was a leader, a famous leader in Greek myth. He was coming back from the Trojan Wars, and he got the message that when his ship sailed close to some rocks, the Sirens would sing such a beautiful song that he would be drawn onto the rocks and killed. So that's the story. And he knew that he wouldn't be able to resist those sirens. So his present self knew that in the future, his present self in the future would do the wrong thing. So he filled all his men's ears with wax, and then he told them to tie him to the mast. Presumably he told them before he filled them with wax, that'd be hard. So he was tied to the mast. And there's a psychological term for this, and it's called a commitment device. So he did something now that would prevent him from doing something wrong in the future. And that's basically the way the story works. He knew he couldn't trust himself to do the right thing, so he came up with a device that committed him to do the right thing. Now, I think this is really interesting because I think we use commitment devices ourselves all the time. And I'm going to throw it out. In fact, let's use the chat box function. And can I ask you, please, to think of any form of commitment device, a decision you might make or some way you'll commit to something to make you do the right thing in the future? Can anyone give me an example of one? Just type it in the chat box if you can think of one. So see if anyone's got one. Brilliant. Okay, Lisa, great. Can you expand on that? Can you?
Well, personally, I'm on a diet, so I know that if I'm not going to eat that food, it can't be in the house. Whereas if it's in the house, there's always that temptation. So throw it away.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I completely recognise that. Yeah, when I go shopping, I know that if I buy chocolates, they're going to get eaten. They won't get eaten over a month. They'll get eaten in 2 evenings. You know, come 10:30 at night, I'm not going to resist. Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Let's see what else we've got. Let's have a look. So Yeah. Right, where are we? Throw away the naughty food, don't buy biscuits. So ITPs are meant to do that, but in many places do, but too many to check after the event whether or not. Okay, so Rupert, you've talked about ITPs being a commitment device. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I typed that badly, didn't I? Yeah, I think the intention is it sets out how you're going to make sure that you do the right thing. I think in my current experience, too many of them set out how incrementally after parts of events we'll check whether or not they did do the right thing. And our endeavor is always now to try and check that you are ready to go to work with the highest probability of success, and let's check there rather than off you go and check afterwards and see whether it happened as you wanted. So they're definitely the right device and the right tool. I think just the last while we've drifted to use them a little bit lazily after the but then the title does put it down as an inspection and test plan, which kind of in common parlance is you check afterwards, don't you?
Yeah, interesting. Great, thanks, Rupert. And one that I think is really pertinent from the construction industry is if we think about safety, many companies said safety needs to be on every single meeting agenda. There's a classic commitment device. They knew it was important and say, well, we're going to put it on the agenda. There's no negotiation, it's on every agenda. And that way it was forced into people's brains, forced into the discussion. So there's an example of a commitment device. Okay, so that's one of the things I'd like to sort of lodge in your brain, this idea of a commitment device, doing something that almost forces you to do the right thing in the future when you know it's going to be more difficult. But what I'd like to do now is have a look at culture, and culture in terms of time. Now, I think everyone on the call probably comes from a Western sort of background, so either European or American sort of are our main influences. And in this Western culture, we talk about time in a particular way. We talk about death is the end of the road. We say time is money. We save time. We spend time. We waste time. And time is therefore commodified. Time is a thing that we need to make best use of. And we've very much got this idea of efficiency. Efficiency is spending your time well, getting as much as done as you possibly can in your time available. And you think of highly efficient people, they've probably got calendars down to 15 minutes, 15-minute meetings. Every meeting has a clear outcome, boom, 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 boom. And that perception is dominated by the present. People think, that they live in the present. The past is gone, the future is abstract, and we're dominated by the present. And that's probably exactly how we see the world of construction. It's what's going on now, really important. But that isn't the only way to view time. And in Eastern cultures, they actually have a different way of explaining what time is. They think about the past, the present, and the future as different landscapes. And they're all equally important, the past, the present, and the future. And they talk about time being the road, the winding road that passes through that landscape. And we just travel along that winding road and observe the past, present, and future as we're going. So that's quite abstract, but it's really interesting that not everyone in the world views time in the way that we think is normal. Now, what I think is worth doing is saying, well, what is the consequence of that different way of thinking about time in terms of the way people behave? And something that we can look at is some economics. So let's compare how Chinese people save money for the future compared to American people. So Americans have this very linear idea of time. Time is a commodity. We have to make the best use of it. Time is money. Whereas the Chinese have this alternative view of time. And this graph from the OECD, so the International Monetary Fund, shows that on average, Chinese people over the last 20 years have been saving between 30 and 40% of their income for the future. Whereas in America, it's down at about 5 up to possibly 10% saving for the future. So this different perspective on time has a very real impact on how we decide to do things. You know, are we spending money and living in the moment, or are we saving money for the future? So I wonder if there might be something in that, in terms of how we relate to error and thinking about, well, actually, how do we make sure we're doing things that are right for the future, not the things that feel like they are the most important in the moment? So with all of this, we have basically been looking at a number of things. We've been saying, what can we do to make better use of our time? And we've looked at this matrix where we can say, well, we need to focus on these things, the important tasks that are not urgent yet. And we want to look at ways like automating and delegating the things that are less important, so they're not using up our time, so we can focus on things that are important. But we've got another challenge, haven't we? We've got this matrix that can say, well, actually, this is how we should use our time on a day-to-day basis. On a day-to-day basis, I want to focus on these things. I want to get rid of these tasks. And that way I can focus on the things that are important. But we also need to think about, well, what can I do today that will make things better for tomorrow, or the next day, or the next day? So it's not only how can I spend my time today on the important things, we can also ask, what should I be doing today that will make it easier for me to focus on the important things in the future? So I'll stop showing my screen and just see what any of you think. Anyone think of anything that might unlock your ability to spend more time in the future thinking about the things that are important and less time worrying about things that aren't important? Any particular techniques or factors?
Protect your daily activity. So the day plan needs to be protected at all costs.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you've got a rigorous...
I'm a one-man band, Nick, so I have to cover all the bases. And what helps me is things like having a deal with the supplier of my printer, who automatically sends me more ink and sends me more paper and monitors my use of my printer automatically, so I don't have to worry about that. And that really is, for me, saving me some admin time, so I can concentrate on the very important things that GIRI needs me to do.
Really interesting. Yeah, okay. So you're clearing out those sort of low importancy tasks by either automating them or delegating them to someone else. Okay.
Nick,
yeah.
I think I'd like to build on Zhao's, I think it's Zhao's point about protecting today's plan. I think it's also about protecting tomorrow's plan. And sometimes when we're able to, when things don't get done today, you don't finish them in the morning, or you triage to decide whether you're going to finish it tomorrow morning and allow it to disrupt tomorrow. And if it doesn't get done today, it gets chucked into the planning pot for next week or next month. And if it can't wait till then, well, that means it was damned important enough to do today, wasn't it? You know, and so not only protect today, but protect tomorrow. And we certainly learned that working on LU and places like that. You know, you've only got this platform tonight, you know, and so don't disrupt tomorrow either.
Interesting. Thank you. Catherine, I saw you had
yes. Well, as a management accountant, 7 years ago, we became 100% paperless. I invested a lot in technology and getting to know more. I'm now also developing my own job costing system for construction industry. But regarding project planning, it takes lots of time to see one project, second project. So what I came up with is I use a specific software, and I've got different projections, different budgets and cash flow for every project. And then it takes me just one click to show my client a scenario that can combine all these projects. So many accountants and many people have to work weeks to combine the projects and they still don't give accurate data. My data connects with accounting system in real time. So first thing connects in real time, and it's just one click when I show these scenarios. So it's being proactive. It's use the technology the best possible way. That's what I would say.
Interesting, really interesting. And it sounds like that would have been quite a lot of work to set up. But the return on your time later makes it well worth it. And there's sometimes people talk about ROTI, ROTI, which is what they call a return on time invested. And that relates to tasks. It's really your important but not urgent tasks. They often give you a massive return on the time you spend, but the return is later. It's not right there. Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to put you back, or rather Helena is going to put you back into some breakout groups. And we're going to have, I think we'll have 4 breakout groups. We've got enough for 4 breakout groups. Or maybe, Helena, either 3 or 4 breakout groups, whatever.
I can have 4 with 4 in each one.
Okay, perfect. And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you breakout groups to do some different things. Here we go. I'll share my screen. So I'm going to ask the odd numbered breakout groups. So breakout groups 1 and 3, it'll pop up in your list. What I'd like you to do is think about commitment devices. So let's have a look. So this is your question. Can you think of ways we could use commitment devices to improve our use of time to prevent error in the future? So we've already heard about, throw out the biscuits. That's a commitment device. We've heard about having health and safety on every agenda. We've heard about ITPs possibly being a commitment device. But are there decisions you can make that you commit to that mean you make better use of time in the future? So that's what I'd like groups 1 and 3 to look at, please. Try and come up with any that we can use. And then for groups 2 and 4, I'm going to ask you to look at culture. So your question is, how could we change our culture so that we're better able to manage time to prevent error in the future? Are there cultural factors that you think would be beneficial if we could change the way our culture helps us engage with time so that we aren't pressured into doing the wrong things? Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay, so Helena, can I ask you to open the rooms for 5 minutes, please? And then at the end, we'll hear from all the teams. So if you can please look out for what number you are, and then pick one person from each team, just to give sort of 30 seconds, no more than that, explanation of what you think of, either in terms of commitment devices we could use or culture that you think might be beneficial. So let's hear can we hear from group 1 first, please? So this is about commitment devices. Any ideas of commitment devices that might help improve our use of time to prevent error? So who was in group 1, please?
I was in group 1.
Go for it, Claire.
They're happy for me to go for it, I guess. So we spoke about really, there's things that we do in practice. So like non-conforming product was one of the ones I thought of straight away, because that's identifying where we're not doing things quite right or completely incorrectly. But you put a preventive action in place. So in that way, you are committing to not repeating the same issue and wasting your time, because most of the errors are non-conformance. It's, they're timely, and you have to make up the sort of rework or whatever. So that was the first one. We spoke about lessons learned and the process of learning from the stuff that we do well and the stuff we don't do well. But then after we've done that, it's about implementing the changes that are required or the mitigation that's required to either prevent the same thing happening again or doing the same thing well again, if that makes sense. So that was the other one we spoke about. Communication came up again, so that's about promoting where you're doing things well. That was one of the other team members said that. So I guess this is where we spoke about this previously, actually, where you're actually sharing where you're doing things well and how you're doing them well, so that others can commit to that plan and do that well in the future. And then another one, sort of on a wider scale, I was thinking about methods of construction. So that's about trying to reduce time, about trying to plan time well, and there's obviously lots of innovation in the industry at the moment coming out every day. So it's about considering those new methods and committing to the future of the industry, really, because we will be changing, all of us soon, because of the carbon, the climate change acts and things like that that are going on. So we'll all have to improve. So yeah, that's our little bit there.
Brilliant, thank you. Does anyone else from Group 1 want to add to anything Claire said there? Expand on any of those points, because she came up with several really, really important points. Okay, well, let's go to Group 3 then. So 3 with the other group looking at commitment devices, and hear from Group 3, please. Who was that? Who was Group 3?
Yeah, I was nominated to talk, I believe.
That's one.
So one of our main talking points were, as a team, having like a collaborative, internal meeting at a set frequency, and obviously allocating the individual those tasks to make sure that that commitment device is a set of minutes that comes out in which everyone knows what they've got to do and by when, and it ties into obviously what the other groups 2 and 4 were doing. Obviously, when allocating people those tasks, is making sure they have enough time to do it. And then obviously we were talking about having support from people higher up in the business, whereby if people aren't doing what they should be doing, not to name and shame, but obviously that tap on the shoulder to make sure that people are doing what they should be. Because once you send out a set of minutes and stuff like that, that's your commitment device, but you can't physically force someone to do those actions. You can't sit there next to them. So that was our main talking point.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so it sort of feels like a set of meeting minutes is kind of a commitment device, but it falls flat unless it's actually followed up and enforced. And so maybe there's a cultural bit that goes with it. Is that fair?
The other point about that meeting is that there needs to be a commitment to it from senior people to attend it. It's no good having a commitment to a meeting of a bunch of people who can't direct and influence the people who've got the actions. So the commitment is from the senior managers or the senior directors of the people involved in delivering the project, coming to a meeting on a regular basis and agreeing together collaboratively what it is that's going to be done. And the other thing we mentioned was making sure, and I think it was the feedback from one of the other groups earlier, that in allocating the actions, you've got to make sure they're realistic timescales are applied to them. There's no good having a big collaborative group of leaders saying that everything's going to be done in 5 minutes when it's quite obviously can't be. So there's got to be realism there as well. But the commitment is from the senior guys to get together on a defined regular basis.
Really interesting, and something that pops to mind when you talk about that, how it must be realistic, is what we focus on in the supervisor and manager training, where we're talking about helpful disagreement, the ability of anyone to turn around to their boss and say, actually, that's not going to work, or are you sure about that? I think this. And in terms of time, saying, you've told me that I've got a week, but I think it's going to take a week and a half, and having the confidence to have those conversations. So yeah, it's really interesting how a lot of these issues are all sort of interweaving and related to this culture idea. Thanks, Cliff. Okay, anyone else, any thoughts on commitment devices? Maybe from anyone else who hasn't spoken? Well, in that case, let's dive on and hear from Group 2, please, in terms of culture. What did you think were the cultural issues or cultural quick wins in terms of improving the way we relate to time?
Well, unsurprisingly, Catherine said technology, which is the right answer, obviously, with regard to just basic truth of information and holistic information, so that you can make good decisions now. And protect from error in the future. And specifically, Catherine used an example about financing. If there isn't enough money in the pot, you can look at projects individually and be making some fairly error decisions. Oh yes, we'll crack on with it, when actually in truth there isn't the money, so it's a bad decision. So a financing example, but generally the concept of technology to again give you holistic stuff, which is that there's been a bit of stuff in the chat about that, hasn't there, about big picture, holistic, or in order to, as was discussed earlier. So technology was one, without doubt. And then the second one, we were talking about leadership style and checking in sort of around conversation. There's a current culture of checking, which doesn't seem to prevent error. And we dovetailed that with a leadership style of a leader ratifying a decision well made by somebody in the organization by asking some probing questions about how the decision was made. And if our checkers were checking decision making rather than just checking the output, then there's an increased learning cycle going on there. So it's sort of a checking and leadership and lens on that whole thing of training and improving decision making now will give you more time for error-free work in the future.
Interesting. Thanks, Rupert. And then now, in the interest of finishing on time, which would seem to be appropriate, can I just have a quick 30-second burst from Group 4 on anything you identified culture-wise that would help us prevent error in the future from time pressures? So, Group 4, please.
Move on then.
Okay, so came up with some really interesting stuff there, and we've seen that there are sort of two ways we can look at preventing time from causing us to create error. So we've got those commitment devices, and we saw various examples of these commitment devices, and we talked a lot about meetings and sticking to schedules, and that's a leadership issue. And also culture, making appropriate use of technology and almost evidence-based decision making. I think that related to, didn't it? So I think, to give Cliff a reasonable chance of summing that up and giving us some words of wisdom that we can all take away, I'll hand back to Cliff now, and I look forward to hearing what you've got to say, Cliff.
Thanks, Nick. There's a couple of things that I felt we needed to address. This question of the high importance, low urgency, I think that's the big takeaway today, that trying to get it into our organisations by one means or another, commitment devices or whatever, this need to think about where we're going to be in the future and what we need to do now to make sure that that happens. I think that high important but low urgency decision making, it always falls away as soon as the pressure comes on. Everybody's worrying about, you know, the thing that needs to be done now. I think there was a good point made about health and safety being on the agenda. Well, why shouldn't quality be on the agenda? I think quality sometimes is on the agenda, but it's just still not given enough importance. And the other thing is coming through to this whole cultural question relating to collaboration, and the leaders of our organizations actually listening when people say, you know, this is a practical amount of time and money that's needed to do something, rather than just saying yes because that gets you the job or whatever. I think the cultural change we're looking at for the industry, and particularly for error, is that we've got to be saying no when we can't do something. And if we can't, you know, that's the whole you know, lowest cost procurement thing and so forth that affects error. And I think time is so much of an issue in that. So thanks, Nick, and thank you for those who've held out to the end, and for those of you who've come back for a revisit, thanks to you as well. And we look forward to seeing you later on this year when we continue with our forums. The the invitation is out there now for you to sign up to our newsletter. So please do that, because it's got plenty of good stuff in it that's relevant to what we've discussed today. We'll also have a look at the things in the chat box, but if you've got anything else before you go, stick it in there. And there's plenty of feedback and so forth you can give us on Twitter and LinkedIn, because we're monitoring that all the time. So, you know, give us your feedback on today and your thoughts, and we'll be taking that forward. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you soon.